before evil had a name, before darkness even knew how to recognize itself, and long before human beings ever walked this earth, there was once an absolute perfection. Not the fragile perfection of the material world, but a pure, eternal order where light did not cast shadows, where every being knew who they were, where they came from, and what they lived for. There was no fear, no doubt, no resistance, only a deep harmony between love and freedom. But inside that perfection, the greatest tragedy in cosmic history was quietly being conceived. Heaven was not a court that enforced obedience. It was a kingdom of freedom. Every angel existed not because they were forced to submit, but because they freely chose to love and to worship. They did not bow out of fear of power, but because they recognized truth. And that is what made heaven complete. An order sustained not by chains, but by understanding. Within that order there were angels burning like fire, the seraphim endlessly praising absolute holiness. There were cherubim, guardians of divine wisdom and mystery. And there were angels sent closer to creation to protect and to guide. Every position mattered. No one was extra, no one was forgotten. And then there was one being who rose above them all. Lucifer did not only stand out, he was the standard, not only because of beauty, but because of a rare fusion of intelligence, authority, and brilliance. He was not simply one angel among many lights. He was a meeting point of light. When he spoke, choirs listened. When he was present, order seemed to sharpen into clarity. Lucifer was called the morning star, not because he stole light, but because he reflected the earliest light. He was a guide, a symbol of beauty and service, proof that a created being could reach the highest heights while still being fully turned toward the Creator. But here is where the greatest paradox of heaven began to appear. No being, no matter how radiant, was stripped of freedom. And where freedom exists, the possibility of choosing wrong always exists. Lucifer was not created to rebel. He was created to love. But real love always demands freedom. And freedom, if it is not anchored in truth, can drift into self-exaltation. The tragedy did not begin with open opposition. It began with a tiny, quiet space inside where light started turning back to look at itself. No one heard the first moment Lucifer questioned himself. There was no thunder, no warning sign, just a passing thought. Could the light in me exist on its own? Is my glory only a reflection? Or is it enough by itself? That question was not blasphemy right away. But it was dangerous because it placed the self at the center of the gaze. From that moment, the line between receiving a gift and claiming a gift began to blur. Heaven was still radiant. The songs still rose. But inside one being, love was already cooling and no one noticed. And that is why this story is not only about Lucifer. It is a warning about a terrifying truth. Falling does not always come from darkness. Sometimes it is born from light loved the wrong way. Welcome to Prophetic History Explained. If you think you already know the story of Lucifer, stay with me. Because what is about to be revealed is not a familiar myth. It is a journey into the nature of freedom, pride, and the greatest tragedy that happened before humanity was ever created. And before we go deeper into the story where light begins to fracture, subscribe to Prophetic History Explained and support us. Your support is what keeps us going, so we can keep bringing you videos that dive into history, prophecy, and the greatest mysteries of faith. Stories not only to hear, but to wrestle with until the very end. The fall did not begin with a rebellion. It began in silence. There was no thunder tearing the sky, no warning sign that shook heaven. Everything still moved as it always had. Holy choirs, perfect order, nothing visibly out of place. But deep inside one single being, a tiny shift happened, so small that from the outside no one would have called it sin. Lucifer began listening to himself. Not listening with humility to know the will of the Creator, but listening like someone waking up to the weight of his own presence. Every song he led, every admiring glance from other angels, every moment heaven seemed more harmonious when he arrived. All of it quietly carved a new feeling into him. I do not only serve the light, I am the light. Pride does not usually show up as a direct denial of God. It often disguises itself as self-awareness. Lucifer did not say, I do not need God. He only asked, is the light in me really only a reflection? And that question began to shift the axis of love. From that moment, Lucifer's gaze was no longer fully upward. It turned inward. He began to admire himself with the kind of attention that used to belong only to the Creator. Not with hatred, but with fascination. And fascination with the self, when it is not anchored in truth, is always the first step toward corruption. Heaven did not recognize the change right away. Lucifer still fulfilled his duties. He still led the choirs. He was still the symbol of beauty and order. But inside, a subtle decay had started. He was doing the right thing, but no longer for the same reason. Love began to cool, not because of hatred, but because it was replaced by self-exaltation. Lucifer slowly felt that the moments of gazing at God no longer satisfied him the way they once did. Not because God changed, but because Lucifer's own light began competing with eternal light. And when a created being starts comparing itself to its own source, the distortion has already begun. God did not ignore it. The warnings did not come as accusations, but as loving reminders. Not to crush Lucifer's freedom, but to rescue it. God saw what Lucifer refused to admit, that his intelligence was becoming a tool to justify the self, that the light in him was turning its back on the source. But pride has a dangerous trait. It does not reject God openly. It reinterprets God's words in a way that benefits itself. Lucifer heard those warnings and felt something very human: suspicion. A vague irritation rose in his mind. Why warn me? Does God not trust that I am faithful enough? Does he not see that I am the one who understands order and light more deeply than anyone else? And here is where freedom began to twist. No longer freedom to love, but freedom to self-assert. Lucifer began to interpret service as a limitation instead of a gift. He began to see his place in heaven's order like a ceiling, not a foundation. And deep inside, a new desire slowly formed. Not the desire to serve higher, but the desire to be recognized as the center. The frightening part is this: Lucifer was not lying to himself. He believed he was seeking truth. But truth separated from humility turns into cold logic, and logic fed by pride can destroy more than any burst of rage. Other angels began to sense the change, even if they could not name it. An invisible distance appeared. Not betrayal, but separation. Lucifer no longer shared the full joy of worship. He started keeping his thoughts to himself, and that silence grew heavy. Heaven was still bright, but somewhere light had begun to tilt. And in this stage, the tragedy became irreversible. Because when a being believes it loves light because light is beautiful, but actually loves light because it belongs to the self, that love has lost its true object. Lucifer had not rebelled yet. He had not spoken words of opposition, but he had stepped onto the most dangerous edge of all, loving himself more than his own source. And from that edge, one more touch, and heaven would never be the same again. The decisive moment did not arrive in chaos. It arrived in absolute silence, where every light waited for a truth to be unveiled. When God announced what was about to happen, heaven seemed to hold its breath, not out of fear, but out of astonishment. This was not an ordinary command, and it was not an adjustment inside a familiar order. It was a revelation deeper than anything ever known, beyond every concept of power and glory. A physical universe would be created. Time and space would have a beginning. And in that finite world, beings made in the image of God would appear, human beings. But what shook heaven was not creation itself. What changed everything was the promise that God himself would enter that world, not clothed in visible power, but taking on the fragile condition of humanity. God would become finite. The Eternal One would accept limitation. The All-Powerful would choose the path of weakness, and in that human form, the angels would be invited to worship. For many angels, this revelation was the summit of love, a love that holds nothing back, a love willing to lower itself completely to rescue those weaker than itself. It was a beauty beyond every standard of power they had ever known. But for Lucifer, that moment became a crack that could not be healed. Not because he did not understand the depth of the plan, he understood it clearly. And that is exactly why he burned with anger. In his mind, the order of the universe should reflect hierarchy, light, intelligence, strength. Bowing before human flesh, even if it was God incarnate, did not feel like humility to him. It felt like an inversion of order. Lucifer saw what many angels did not notice at first. Humans would be weak, they would fall, they would betray. And God, knowing that, still chose to love them enough to accept suffering and death. In Lucifer's mind, this was not only confusing, it was unacceptable. A God who is crucified? An all-powerful one killed by his own creation? No. That was not glory the way Lucifer understood glory, and then from the deepest place in his thoughts, a question rose up, never spoken aloud, but striking like lightning. Why not me? Lucifer had once been the closest, the most radiant. The one light seemed to follow. If a mediator was needed between God and creation, why would it be fragile human flesh? If a symbol of glory was needed, why choose lowering instead of elevation? From that question, bitterness formed. Not bitterness from being hated, but bitterness from not being chosen. And that bitterness quickly hardened into a dangerous conclusion. This plan is a mistake. Lucifer did not think he was fighting God. He believed he was defending order. In his mind, bowing before flesh was betrayal of what an angel was. And when the moment came when heaven was invited to respond to the revelation with worship, Lucifer did not kneel. He stood. There was no explosive rage, no shouted revolt, just one word, cold, final, unwavering, no. That word was not only refusing a command, it was refusing a definition of love. It was rejecting a God who chose humility over raw power. And in that moment, an invisible line was drawn between light and darkness. Lucifer watched other angels bow. He watched agreement spread, and instead of feeling alone, he felt outraged. In his mind, heaven had just lost its dignity. And from that outrage, the decision became irreversible. Lucifer did not only refuse, he began to believe he had to speak. He had to expose the absurdity of this revelation. He had to protect what he believed was right. That moment marked the end of one stage. No more silent thoughts, no more hidden dissatisfaction. Lucifer's freedom reached its far edge, from a place where he could still return, into the open assertion of the self against its own source. Heaven was still bright, but the light had been split, and from the moment Lucifer said no, the story stopped being about one angel. It became the story of the greatest clash between two visions of glory. The glory of love that lowers itself, and the glory of the self that refuses to bow. From here on, there was no neutral ground, and heaven was moving fast toward a war that could not be avoided. The rebellion did not begin with swords. It began with words. After Lucifer refused to kneel, heaven did not explode into chaos. Instead, a heavy silence fell over every layer of light. And inside that silence, Lucifer began doing the most dangerous thing an intelligent being can do. He explained his disobedience as righteousness. Lucifer did not rise as an enemy. He rose as a protector, not a protector of God, but a protector of what he called the dignity of angels. And because he was the most radiant, the most skilled with reasoning, his voice carried a weight no one could dismiss. He did not speak about hatred. He spoke about reason. He did not call for violence. He called for thinking. He did not tell angels to turn against God. He planted a question. Is what is being asked truly right? Lucifer said that bowing before human flesh would lower the essence of light. That cosmic order was being reversed, that angels made from pure light should never be placed beneath finite beings who are weak and will fall. His words were not crude, they were clear, structured, and persuasive. And that is exactly why they were dangerous. Many angels listened, not because they hated God, but because they feared losing the meaning of themselves. Lucifer touched the deepest fear. If they must bow before weakness, does their light still matter? His words sowed doubt like seeds falling into soil already prepared by pride. It was not the weakest angels who were shaken first, but the brightest, the smartest, the ones used to being admired. Lucifer found allies among souls convinced they were born for higher places. Heaven began to crack, not with explosions, but with whispers. Then another voice rose, not eloquent, not polished, just one short question, simple as a blade cutting through every excuse. Who is like God? Michael was not the most radiant, not the highest in rank. But he held what Lucifer had lost, the clarity of humility. Michael did not argue in long speeches because truth does not need decoration. His question was not meant to humiliate Lucifer. It was meant to put everything back where it belongs. Who is like God? Not the most radiant angel, not the smartest one, not the strongest light. Only God is God. That question forced the angels to face the core issue. Are they made to reflect or to compete? To love or to self-exalt? To bow in freedom or to stand in pride? Lucifer heard the question and felt exposed, not because it was wrong, but because it was so true it could not be denied. Michael named what Lucifer tried to hide. This resistance was not love for truth. It was fear of accepting a love more humble than the self could tolerate. From that moment, there was no gray zone, no hesitation. The angels had to choose, and that choice shook heaven. War broke out not only between two armies, but between two ways of existing. Light against light. Not good versus evil the way humans imagine, but faithfulness versus self-exaltation. The angels who followed Lucifer fought with terrifying force because they believed they were defending the nature of light. But the faithful angels fought with a different strength, the certainty that truth does not belong to the highest creature, but to the one who is the source of all things. Michael did not fight for personal glory. He was not trying to prove himself. He stood on the front line for one reason only. Truth must be defended. And in that faithfulness, he was stronger than any power born from pride. The battle did not last like earthly time, but its shockwave carved itself into cosmic history. When the final word was spoken not by the strength of weapons, but by the verdict of truth, Lucifer and those who followed him were driven out of the light. No one was forced. No one was tricked at the final moment. They fell because they chose to stand outside the source. Lucifer, who had once been the morning star, no longer reflected light. He carried his own light, but that light, separated from its source, quickly turned into darkness, and with him a part of heaven was lost forever. After the war, heaven was not the same. Order was restored, but the memory of rebellion remained, not as a stain, but as an eternal reminder. Even light can collapse if it forgets where it came from. And from that moment on, the war was no longer only in heaven. It began casting its shadow over all of creation. Lucifer's fall did not end when he was thrown out of heaven. In truth, that was only the beginning. Being cut off from light did not mean losing consciousness. Lucifer did not become nothing. He became a being with the clearest memory of what he had lost, and that memory, more than any punishment, became the fire that burned him without rest. Where he fell was not a fully organized hell. It was a state of chaos where order was broken, where light no longer reached, where the presence of God became a painful emptiness. There, Lucifer understood what he had refused to accept. Light cannot exist when it is cut off from its source. But that knowledge did not lead him to repentance. It led him to resentment. Lucifer did not return. He did not ask forgiveness. He chose a different road, turning loss into a mission. If he could not possess the glory of God, he would stain that glory wherever it appeared. And in all of creation, there was one thing God loved in a special way: human beings. Human beings are weak, finite, clothed in fragile flesh. But that is exactly why they became the living symbol of the plan Lucifer rejected. In them, the light is not as dazzling as an angel's, but they carry something Lucifer can never regain: the ability to grow in love, the ability to fall and rise, the ability to be redeemed. So humanity became the target. Lucifer did not approach humans with overwhelming force. He did not need it. He approached them with the same strategy he used to pull angels toward him, planting doubt inside their relationship with God. In the garden, he did not deny God. He questioned God's intention. Not God does not exist, but does God really want what is good for you? The same old whisper returned in a new form: become the center. Define good and evil for yourself. Take what has not been given. And when humans listened, history began carrying the mark of a war no longer in heaven but inside the inner world of each person. Lucifer did not need to appear openly. He works in the gray space between longing and fear, between freedom and pride. He does not force, because forcing destroys freedom. He suggests, he provokes, he makes people believe they are choosing, while in reality they are repeating the same ancient mistake: wanting to be like God, but not wanting to be in God. From there, his presence stretches across human history. Not in every suffering, but in every temptation that bends love out of alignment. When faith is tested, he whispers that faith is meaningless. When people suffer, he suggests God has abandoned them. And when people succeed, he encourages them to believe they do not need anyone else. But what Lucifer cannot accept and cannot control is the limit of his power. He can tempt, but he cannot force. He can dim, but he cannot extinguish light. Because the light human beings receive does not come from him. It comes from God, the source Lucifer cut himself away from. At the height of history, that conflict was exposed most clearly. Not when Lucifer seemed to win, but when he lost to absolute humility. When he faced a man who rejected every path of power, rejected performance and spectacle, and chose obedience all the way to the end. In that moment, Lucifer realized his old strategy had hit a boundary he could not cross. But he did not stop. Resentment would not let him stop. In the final vision of history, Lucifer appears not as a wandering star, but as an open force of deception. No longer private whispers, but public manipulation. No longer tempting individual souls, but shaping a counterfeit order where power, fear, and worship are twisted. But the core of the story is not the strength of darkness. It is its ending. Because no matter how loudly Lucifer screams, history does not end in his hands. The war that began in heaven will end not through negotiation, but through truth fully revealed. darkness will be exposed, deception will lose its power to persuade, and the one who wanted to seize the throne will be placed in his true position, forever separated from the source he once reflected. What remains is not destruction, but a final confirmation. Good wins not because it is more violent, but because it is real. Evil is not defeated by equal force, but by the steady presence of love, truth, and freedom placed where they belong. And that is why Lucifer's story is not only an ancient drama of heaven, it is a mirror held up to every human choice. Every time we place the self above the source, every time we misunderstand freedom as separation from truth, every time we believe light belongs to us instead of recognizing that we belong to the light, that war has never stopped. But its ending has already been decided. Applied to life today, the biggest lesson is this: learn to tell the difference between freedom and self-exaltation. Freedom helps a person love and stay connected. Self-exaltation separates a person and crowns the self as the standard. Humility does not make us smaller, it places us where we belong. And only when we are in the right place can we truly grow. Every day, in very small choices, how we respond to correction, how we face failure, how we view our success, the battle between light and darkness continues. Not with thunder, but with inner posture. Not with war, but with the repeated choice. Bow before truth or elevate the self. If stories like this help you think more deeply about history, faith, prophecy, and the unseen patterns shaping the world and human life, join the Prophetic History Explained community. Here we explore stories of history, prophecy, and spiritual meaning with depth, connection, and a perspective that goes beyond what is familiar on the surface. And do not forget to subscribe to Prophetic History Explained to support us. Your support is the motivation that helps the channel keep bringing quality content, stories that move the heart, and lessons that remain valuable for both the present and the future.